So thank you again. Thank you, everybody. When Tosh just talked about, when we talked about this, one of the first things I wanted was I wanted to do a live audience. So give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. My name is Jesse Anderson. I am the managing director at Big Data Institute. I wrote a book called Data Teams, where I talked about how do we structure these teams? What do we do about this? And I'm the host of this podcast. With me is Zhamak Dehghani. She is the founder of Data Mesh. She now has her own startup in stealth mode, former ThoughtWorks, and author of Data Mesh. Then we have Rob Winters. He is the head of data products at Miro, senior director of data at TripActions. And then Harvinder Atwal. He is the chief data officer at Evri. Before that, he was the chief data scientist at Money Supermarket and is the author of Practical Data Ops. Once again, I really want your feedback and your questions. Please do give us those questions. One of the concepts I really talk about in data teams was we need all three teams. We just don't need a gaggle of data scientists. You're probably here because you have a gaggle of data scientists who are not working well, who are not delivering that value. So it's really key to me to actually get that value out there. So let's ask Harvinder, talk about some of the structures that you have found in data teams to work well and some of the pros and cons of them.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. So the first thing to realize is there's no perfect structure for teams. The way I look at it is you just got to pick the least crap one for basically the maturity level of the organization, the data you have, and what you're trying to achieve. And the way I look at it is basically to evaluate it across a few different dimensions. So the first dimension is your team orientation. So teams can be functional, and that's fairly typical. So you have a team of data engineers, data scientists, BI people, data analysts, and so on. So all the skills that you need to kind of deliver outcomes from data. Now, that approach has its pros and cons. So functional teams, great. People are working with other people who share the same skills. They can learn from them. But the downside is that those teams become bottlenecks for each other, right? So the data scientists will be, well, we need this from the data engineers. Data engineers will be, no, sorry, we're working on this for the BI team and so on, right? And you end up with, these prioritization battles, escalations, and so on. Not to say that you can't get functional teams to work. Google and Apple famously have functional teams, but they put a lot of thought and effort into making sure those teams never become a bottleneck for each other. The next way of structuring teams is probably a matrix. But I think we'll all agree that The Matrix was a great film, but a terrible way to organize people. So let's scratch that one. The next kind of orientation is domain. And this is the one I'm the biggest fan of. So when I was doing research for my book, I was looking at, what does the data actually tell us? I'm always surprised that data people don't look at data to decide things, even though they use data to tell other people how to do their job. But anyway, the data clearly says from the likes of McKinsey and Accenture that cross-functional domain teams perform best. So if you're not familiar with a domain could be, it's going to vary by your organization. So it could be by customer, by product, by region, or whatever works for your organization. And then you have these long-standing teams that are cross-functional, that are aligned to that domain. So they will consist of data engineers, BI people, data analysts, and so on. Whatever's required to work with that domain. So that's your first task, is to figure out the orientation. The next is to look at reporting lines. Now, these can be different. So you can have very centralized data teams that all report into a data function or another function. You can have completely decentralized teams. So famously, Netflix is very decentralized. They have teams for each of their sort of internal verticals. The marketing team will have their own data function. Finance will have their own. Product will have their own, and so on. But I think you have to be pretty mature to operate in that way. And then the final way, basically, is some kind of hybrid of some centralization and some sort of decentralization. And that's my favorite. So you could go all the way to the embedding model, like Airbnb. So they will have people who are reporting into a particular function, but a dotted line into data centrally, a center of excellence. Or you could have essentially sort of those domain teams being held together by a center of excellence, because the downside of having these domain-orientated teams with different skills is that people could get isolated. So you need something to tie those teams together in terms of best practice, consistency of recruitment, best technical approaches, and so on. So kind of that's my take on it. You've got to look at your organization, what you're trying to achieve, evaluate it through the lens of these different dimensions. But I definitely think my favorite is having like a central team which manages the data platform that enables other domain teams to be able to do their job, and those domain teams are cross-functional.
Good. There you have it. I see a lot of people taking notes. This is the person to take notes from, so thank you, Harvinder.
Just buy my book.
I was worried we weren't going to fill the whole hour with questions. We've got Harvinder on the team.
Yes.
It should be good.
Yes. Just wait till you get some alcohol in Harvinder.
Yeah,
oh my goodness, then he starts talking.
Sorry, am I taking all the time up?
So Rob, we talked during your episode about some fundamental roles when you're just getting started or whether you have a full squad. Could you sketch that out for us?
Well, I mean, I think you kind of actually started answering that question at the beginning, but if you think about it, you effectively, and since we're talking about data mesh and data products, you effectively have those who are sort of building source products that everyone will depend on. This is where a lot of data engineers are working for, I think, data warehousing and so on and so forth.
You need to adjust your mic up above.
There we go. Is that better? Yep, good. Thanks. So you basically, you have your data engineering teams who are building a lot of the source products that everyone are going to depend on. But I think one of the most important things that these teams are also doing are enabling the consumer product build teams. So analysts should not just be building dashboards. That is a failure. And also most analysts really want to build their technical skills. I actually don't really like the idea of an analytics engineer as a role specifically. I like the idea of an analyst who knows how to do data transformation, build an effective data product, and build that last mile insight component on top of it. And I think that's one place where your engineers can really enable them through also building capability. And then the last role that we have kind of designed around our data scientists who essentially build machine learning oriented data products. And again, if you get to a really large company, and I know there are roles for ML engineers and everything else, but when you're talking about just starting out, having a full stack data scientist who can build the fundamental data set that they need for their data models and deliver the data model end to end in a framework built by your engineers, you're going to be able to create a very effective data team that can scale to a fairly high degree just by having these three roles and then building out T-shaped capability in the people. That's just my personal opinion on the topic.
That's what we're here for. We are all here to hear your personal
I also wanted
opinion.
to be a little shorter.
So Zhamak, moving to you, we've been talking about data mesh. We've seen a lot about data mesh in this conference, and the focus is on the social technical aspect to it. Could you talk about some of the socio part? How are these teams formed in your opinion?
Sure. I guess maybe we talk about how the teams or data teams are formed before data mesh, what it looked like. I think, as Harvinder mentioned, we had divided our organizations functionally. So we have app developers, and for the last 10 years, we moved around to a domain-oriented app development, like digital teams that are working toward a domain mission, whether it's an e-commerce team or order management team. These are functions of your business, so you have technology, business-aligned technology teams. But then we've got a wall, and then we've got the data teams, and within that data teams, we've got a bunch of intermediary roles, right? You've got data engineers and data analysts and data scientists. But the truth is that the value is orthogonal to these teams. So if you want to deliver end-to-end value, an applied machine learning model deployed to your e-commerce systems that's making predictions for recommending styles or recommendations, you've got to make changes to all these functional teams. The data engineers have to make changes, the data scientists. So that's a very fragmented, siloed, fragile system. So with data mesh, we try to change that and say, okay, we want to have mission-oriented or business outcome-oriented cross-functional team that are coming together to enable the mission of the outcome of that particular function of the business or domain of the business. And within that team, you've got app developers, you've got operation people, and you've got data people that are either sharing data as a product or generating data as a product or applying that data into those teams. I apply team topologies. Has anybody read the book Team Topologies here? Yeah, a few people, right? It's a fantastic book, and it's one of the most effective ways to think about teams and their interaction models. So they have the concept of stream-aligned teams, teams that are end-to-end responsible for a business outcome. And within that, you can have team of teams, so for folks working on the data aspects of it or folks working on the app aspects of it, but they're collaborating for an end-to-end outcome. And then you've got supporting teams. As Harvinder mentioned, you might have a centralized platform team, which is never actually centralized, because within that team, platform team, you've got areas of platform, like you've got identity management, you've got your storage, like various aspects of domains within the platform context, and so on. So your stream-aligned teams, which are your domain teams, cross-functional domain teams, supported by platform teams, and they've got, a few other types of teams. You've got enablement, that is orthogonal, like group of people that are actually enabling these stream-aligned teams to deliver, but may not be familiar with all the bells and whistles of the platform, so you want to enable them. And you might have a very complicated subsystem around the encryption that really nobody understands how to implement beyond a few, engineers. So we might have a complicated subsystem team, but they've got a fantastic model that I adapted for data mesh.
Good. We'll ask one question from the audience. Go ahead, Tosh.
Okay, I'm going to choose this one because it's got the most votes so far, and you can all see that, so I can't cheat anymore. So should the data team sit within the IT department or separately?
Can I have a There's so many things wrong about that, that question. So many things to unpack. IT department and then data team, right? So I think the role of a centralized IT team is under question. So what happens to what have happened in high-performing organization over the last few years? The IT team has restructured itself from a centralized shared resources model and project-oriented model to product-oriented and business-aligned model, right? So IT team has formed cross-functional teams, long-standing teams that work closely with particular function of the business. So you see in a large retailer, as an example, I worked with Gap Inc., large clothing company in the US, and they've got their IT department. It's not a centralized IT. They've got e-commerce team, you've got order management team, they've got customer team, they've got FPOS and teams, point of sales team. So these are functions of the business, and they've got cross-functional team that are working directly with the business owner who's running the stores and the function of running the point of sales in stores, and have a strategy how this system should work. And that's how the IT is organized. Should data be the function of this cross-functional team? Absolutely. So I don't really see why data team should be a separate team. It's like saying I've got an app team or I've got a mobile team. We're really changing to become mission-oriented teams. So I hope that one day we will have data embedded in those domain teams and no centralized IT managing fungible resources, humans.
Rob, Harvinder?
I don't think it matters whether it's in IT or not, to be honest. We actually had this conversation earlier about should it be in finance. It really doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is how your data team or your data organization interfaces with every other part of the business as a whole, okay? Is it a team which is just going to be beholden to completing requests, or is it going to be a team that's going to build strategic vision and direction about how data can be an asset and a capability in the organization? Is it going to be a team where it's ticket in, action out, dashboard out, or is it going to be a team where it's actually empathetically engaged with all the different business units and understanding the problems? And yes, embedding is a great way to do that, but even if you have a centralized model, this is a choice you make as a data leader is, how am I going to relate to everyone else and what is my responsibility to the organization? And when you take that sort of mindset to it, it really doesn't matter what vertical you roll up to, so long as the executive gives you the space to execute in that manner.
I agree with Rob, and I'd love to believe that we can get to what Zhamak just mentioned very quickly, but I don't think we're there yet. So part of the motivation for writing my book, I'm going to be slightly contrarian here, was the fact that I had struggles with my IT department who didn't understand data analytics. I spoke to lots of data analysts and data scientists and other organizations who were having similar struggles. You know, they'd want to access data, and the IT team would be like, why do you need access to that data? What are you going to do with it? I need this attribute so I can explore the data. Oh yeah, send us your request, and maybe in a year's time we can put it into a data warehouse for you. We need Python. We can't use Python, it's a security risk. And why aren't you using Java like the developers? So there's this massive divide between IT and data. And we ended up resolving that by actually splitting out the data team from IT and centralizing data into a CDO function that reported straight into the chief executive officer. I think hopefully things are changing now. That divide is being bridged. And as Zhamak said, you know, hopefully we won't need that distinction in future. But at the moment, I don't think that's where most organizations are at. So yeah, I'm in favor of data sitting outside IT in most organizations until they're mature enough to combine it. But I totally get, you know, why we should evolve to not actually thinking of domain and products and technology as being separate things.
I think we've received three good answers on that. I consider this in data teams as well. For me, the issue was the friction between IT and whatever organization, because sometimes IT will have a very specific mandate, whatever that mandate is, and that often comes at either opposite of or not quite aligned with what the data teams need to do. So the data teams will need this done and the IT teams. So for me, putting them under the same chief level officer is important because you will align on objectives all the way up to the board level. A little bit different than what but this is what big corporations have to deal with. Very good. Rob, how do you become a mature data organization?
That's a great question. I don't know if there are a lot of mature data organizations out there. And I think you actually cited some statistics on that this morning about people who actually use data or feel they're data driven, right? I guess the question is, how do you define mature? I would say mature is data sits at the foundation of every choice that you're making, and you know how you're going to measure that choice before you take the choice, and then you actually measure it and you reflect back on the learnings. I'd love to see a show of hands who feels that their company operates in that manner. If anyone puts their hand up, I'm going to trade seats with you, because. But I think that's ultimately getting to that point is building awareness, it's building visibility, it's building trust, and it is building, again, understanding and partnership, right? I think one of the big failings of BI when we talk about getting to self-service is a lot of us working in BI, we were throwing data assets out or dashboards where you had a lot of filters out or something like that and saying, okay, Mr. Product Owner, go figure it out. Here's all your data. You can self-serve now. And that's not actually the partnership they were looking for. They were looking for guidance and insights and recommendations and tools that help them really solve specific problems. So again, I think it comes back to people. It's, you want to get to maturity, your starting point is how do you get your data team to have that understanding and to build that close partnership with whatever part of the organization you want to bring data maturity to, be it customer success or product or whatever else. And that requires training them not just on the technology, not just on the how do you run CI or what are the metrics, but training them on what is the PM thinking and what are they going to be thinking tomorrow, and how do you make sure that you are thinking along that path with them. And I think that is where embedding becomes really powerful, but I'll also say you can do that with centralization, just you have to change how you measure your team, what you coach them to, and what skills you train with them. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much in agreement with what you said.
All right,
Yeah,
cool.
I'm going to agree with you all day long.
There we go.
So very good. So we've been talking quite a bit about data mesh. Let's get deeper into some more data mesh talk. So one of the things that I think is clear is that everybody thinks that they're doing data mesh, be that actual organizations or even vendors. So that brings up the question of, are they really doing data mesh? So we have Zhamak, the high priestess and judge of what is data mesh and not. She grimaced. So, but you did form a company that's in stealth mode. What can you tell us about this company?
Oh, I can't tell much. But I tell you this, when data mesh was introduced, it was introduced as a set of principles, right? It's this North Star we want to get to where we've got, the ownership of the data remains with the domains, people that are closest to data and understand it. And then that data gets shared as a product by those cross-functional domain teams and gets applied and used within the business domain that you're in. And then, yes, to get there, you need a platform, in a self-serve platform, so that ability it's actually feasible for these cross-functional teams to work with data. They don't have to go and hire 100 data engineers in every function of the business. And there is a way to manage the governance, right? There's a computational way to make sure at every point of independent autonomous data access, data write, data read, data access, you have programs, code that is running, policies as code that protect that access. So the data mesh was introduced as a set of principles. And then I sat back for a few years. I didn't really sit back. I was implementing this with clients in real world examples. But see how the vendors are evolving their products so that we can bring this vision to life. And to my surprise, very little happened foundationally, right? So what has happened is a lot of vendors are trying to remove some of the constraints they have. I gave this example as an example. AWS still using lake formation, which is a lake house architecture, as a solution for data mesh, but what they did was they enabled cross-account data sharing, just one step forward to remove limitations. So they've removed some limitations, or some other folks, added periphery features and kind of labeled data mesh, which is fantastic. Vendors leaning in is great. But the thing that didn't happen was reimagining the developer experience. If we want to embed data work in every cross-functional team, what is the future experience of data sharing? What is the experience of a developer? And I'm a developer, I was a developer, so that persona resonates with me. So instead of moving toward more specialization, yet another analyst engineer, ML engineer, like all of these intermediary specialized functional roles that we introduce, how can we make every vanilla developer to be part of this mesh and share data and use data, and what does that experience look like? So that's my mission, bringing principles of data mesh to life through developer-centric technologies. That's all I can share right now.
Sounds like a good tagline. So speaking of tags, Gartner came out with their hype cycle, and poof, they said that data mesh is obsolete. What do you think about that?
I had a giggle. I don't know. I think the hype cycle has an interesting process to be generated. So every blip on a hype cycle, who's familiar with Gartner's hype cycle? Do we have to describe it? Do you want to talk about what it is?
Hype cycle is a way that Gartner sells reports for a lot of money and makes a lot of money as a business. But in this case, there's a circle that goes, there's a curve that goes up, and they say that's the height. And unfortunately, data mesh didn't even make it to the height.
Yeah.
Never even made it to the trough of disillusionment, which is normally where technologies go to die.
Yeah, so every circle on that hype cycle, every piece of technology that Gartner puts on that cycle is owned by one or two specific analysts. So is being represented, I think it's an analyst opinion based on the data pool. Like that they have. They work with a certain type of companies, I'm not going to name names, that perhaps for them, based on their data points, they think that data mesh, before it becomes ubiquitous, it becomes obsolete. Clearly, they didn't come to this conference. But, so I guess my question to Gartner is, where is the data? I mean, is this an opinion piece? Is this a wish list? Or is this really a validated, quantified data point? Yeah, and maybe there is a superior approach and technology that will come and take over data mesh. We just haven't seen it, and they might have seen it, haven't told us yet.
Yeah, my eyes are peeled. I'm not going to pay for the report, though. I'll keep an eye out for that. Okay, Harvinder, what does an author on data ops bring to a company that's data mesh?
So for those of you not familiar with data ops, there's actually a few competing definitions. So some people very narrowly define it as DevOps for data, but I do think that's too narrow, because even DevOps, when you're talking about technology, is not that useful unless you're also applying Agile and other methodologies. So I prefer a wider definition, which is kind of the application of software engineering principles like DevOps, Agile delivery methodologies, plus concepts from Lean, both Lean manufacturing and Lean product development, applied to data analytics. Because essentially what you're doing mostly with data analytics is you're producing a product from raw data. And so it's a production process, and there's a lot of complexity in that, hence why we see a lot of very high failure rates in data projects. So that's kind of my definition of data ops, which is applying those principles to be able to produce those data products in a very reproducible, high-quality way. There's another definition, which is basically if you chat to a whole lot of vendors, they would say data ops is whatever my product does, but let's ignore that. So for me, data ops and data mesh are very much complementary. So, I spoke about domain-driven design. I'm a big fan of that, and obviously that's a big component of data mesh. And also data products and data as a product is a fundamental part of data ops. I think, to bring the two closer together, there does need to be some maturity. So, I mentioned this divide between technology, IT, and data. So one of the differences between sort of operational, transactional uses of data versus data analytics is with data analytics, there's just so many things that can go wrong. You can have missing data, duplicate data, schema evolution, test data pollution, you name it. So aside from all the technology that can go wrong, you've got things in the data that can cause errors. And I think at the moment, you still have that divide. You have people who are used to dealing with transactional systems. For them, data is a byproduct. And then you have people doing analytics. And so to get data mesh to work, I think you need people who are familiar in the challenges of both those analytical and transactional uses of data. And the technology here, I know you're working on it, Zhamak, and hopefully you may be able to reveal something, or you may be able to reveal something, but I think, the technology is very different as well. So for transactional systems, you're dealing with, processing many thousands, if not millions of events per second, whereas with analytics, you're dealing with running queries across many thousands of millions of records all at once. So I think that technology bridge needs to be, that technology gap also needs to be bridged.
Yeah, and if I may, I would say data ops is probably a prerequisite to do data mesh. If you don't have those rigorous and evergreen software engineering practices and DevOps practices, don't even bother with data mesh. It is a prerequisite. In fact, I remember where microservices came out, which was over 10 years ago. In the operational world, we had a similar challenge. We had a challenge of complexity. Our aspirations, the size of applications and complexity of applications were outgrowing the approach of his monolithic way of building applications. So we started breaking teams apart and bringing applications apart, and we came up with this idea of domain-driven services with 2 pizza teams and API-only way of communicating. And back then, there was a similar enthusiasm in the app development community around it. And Martin Fowler wrote an article, which is still on his site. You must be this tall to do microservices. And he put a bunch of DevOps practices as prerequisites and level of maturity before you even think about distributed solutions. And I would say the same thing applies here to data mesh.
Follow up to you, Zhamak. If a company was struggling with their data mesh, what advice would you give management specifically?
To management, hopefully the management does have visibility to what they're struggling with and has the data points is why they're struggling with. So the first thing I would say is just get an understanding of why we are struggling and what we're struggling with. Is it really a misunderstanding of what data mesh needs to be? And what I'm saying, and I shared that in my keynote earlier, is that we come from a rich background and way of thinking in data to data mesh, right? So our mental model, our biases really influences how we are contextualizing data mesh. I have so many conversations where people try to solve the past paradigm's problems with data mesh, and that's fundamentally flawed because we are changing the definition of the problem and we need new solutions. So master data management as one, and we can maybe talk about that separately, but I think maybe the first thing that I would ask management is understanding how organization is perceiving data mesh, how they're contextualizing it. Maybe they are not even building data mesh. So gaining an understanding would be the first place to start with. But it's a tough question, Jesse. What did you want me to say? It's a really hard question.
I wanted you to have this magic wand where you just say, "Oh, I did that," and it was like in a movie where I just gave them this Moneyball speech, and the CEO just, "Oh, I understand it now." That doesn't happen.
I can probably answer this by horror stories that I could share when data mesh went wrong and what management was doing. I'll give you one. So, and you probably come across this one because a lot of the cloud providers, again, no criticism, without cloud providers, we won't have data mesh, but a lot of cloud providers, to get your data on their cloud, so, that's their business, they are bundling data mesh with cloud migration. They say, well, you know what, you must come to my cloud because I have a data mesh oriented solution, and as part of this cloud migration, we're doing data mesh. And that could be recipe for disaster because the KPIs and success metric around cloud migration from the perception of a management, what is it? Can anybody have a guess? What's the KPI for a successful cloud migration? If you're the manager, what are you going to count? Cost, yes. But also the sense of progress is like how much data is on the cloud. Like, do we have any disks with data on-prem, or have we moved everything to the cloud, right? So it's the saturation of your destination storage and how much data you have migrated. Data mesh, on the other hand, the KPI and success factor for the data mesh is around value. Are you getting value? Are you enabling use cases that are data-driven with data mesh? And how many of those have you enabled? How quickly have you enabled those use cases? And this could be quite orthogonal if they're done at the same time. So we had this client, they started with single account on Azure. They wanted a full-fledged data mesh. I mean, over 3 years, they had 300 data products, a very sophisticated data platform, and so on. 2 executives fired because what they were measuring was, is the lake saturated with my data, hydrated? That's language. Okay, we're obsessed with water, of course. Every data analogy is to do with water. Is my lake cloud hydrated? And on the other hand, with data mesh folks, well, how many use cases have we enabled? And there were fascinating use cases in healthcare. So this can be orthogonal. So management really didn't understand what they were getting themselves into. They just bought this idea of, I'm going to go to this cloud and I'm going to get data mesh for free with it.
Warn me next time to sit down that management didn't have some unrealistic expectations. First time you've all heard that, right? Unrealistic expectations from management? Lots of blank stares. Nobody's ever seen that. Let's take a question from the audience, Tosh.
Well, I actually need you to cede. Go on to Rob's next question, and then I have mine.
Rob's next question. Okay. So, Rob, do you think data engineering's biggest challenges are technology or people?
I think every organization's problem is people and process, not technology. If you look at it, we're constantly trying to buy solutions, build solutions to things that are caused by, be it a failure to communicate, a failure to have direction, a failure to have training and enablement, a failure to have reflective understanding of problems as they happen. And you can't buy your way to a data program. You can only solve it through how you develop people, and you can't buy your way to great data engineering or hire consultants to great data engineering. You have to know where you're going and communicate that vision and build communication skills and build competency. And that's what creates great data engineering in an organization. Is that the right answer for your next question?
Yes. I'm switched off now. Oh, there I am. Thanks for that. So, Rob, I've got two questions around data engineers. Let's see if I can do it. So, in domain-aligned teams, as you're structuring people management around data teams in a data mesh, who manages the data engineers across the different domains?
Is that to Rob?
Is that to me? Because I'm thinking about how to answer that question. But maybe you've got an answer off the cuff.
Yeah, so this is a challenge with cross-functional domain teams, which is you don't want them to become isolated. So this is where I mentioned like having a center of excellence or coordinator role, which kind of enforces kind of like a dotted line, ensuring sort of consistency of things like hiring and development, and consistent patterns of development and so on. So yeah, the reporting line would always be into that domain team, but in order to prevent them being isolated, they need a dotted line to a subject matter expert in a central team or a center of excellence.
That's what I was thinking is basically you want to have these standards, you want to have a central development program, for example, and say, look, and this is one of the problems with sort of breaking things down into domain is you end up with your definition of a great engineer might be different from my definition of a great engineer. I might be trying to really develop and grow skill. You might be saying, look, they can just keep writing SQL and dumping data into Excel and they're awesome. I'm happy. Yeah. And setting those standards organization on a skill set, a leveling, and making sure there's a common way you grow and develop and measure. I think that's the foundation if you are going to go to domain orientation and be successful. So.
And I had one more question for you, Rob, which is around data engineers needing a technical, I'm not picking on you, don't worry, okay. Needing a technical manager or non-technical delivery manager.
So there are obviously different schools of thought around this. I have my opinion. I know it's probably wrong or it's very dogmatic, and I apologize in advance. I think a good manager is always able to stay in the weeds enough to give meaningful feedback and guidance to the people they manage. I do not like the idea of professional managers who lose touch. I do not like the idea of professional managers who have 25 direct reports. By the way, that doesn't even work, even if you're non-technical. I think it's really important that a manager can always go, say, 2 levels down with whatever level they're managing, and they can work. And what that means is, if you're a director and you've got managers and then people below that, I would still expect my director to be able to make a PR, write a piece of codes, fix a dashboard if it's broken, understand how the process works. And I think it's really, it sets the tone for what you can expect from the people in your group. It builds confidence, it inspires trust, it allows you to better understand the problems that they're dealing with, keeps you from becoming that ivory tower manager and ending up in isolation. I see at least one person smiling who knows exactly the experience I'm talking about. And I think it's really, really important. There's a leadership principle, actually the first principle for the US Marine Corps is be technically and tactically proficient. And that basically dictates that you are still technical, you can still do the job. Maybe you don't build full ML models because obviously you don't have the time commitment when you've got 35 people in your group, but you should be able to at least understand what's going on and make small changes and be part of the process. Every great manager I've worked with actually understands what I'm doing and has been able to help me grow in my capabilities. So.
Any other thoughts? Nope. Okay, so Harvinder and Rob, you both started at new companies recently. What did you start, stop, and continue? Let's start with Harvinder.
Yeah, so I recently moved to Evri from Money Supermarket. So I went from a relatively mature data organization to one where it's quite decentralized. So local teams decide on the technology and how they're going to use the data. And so what I'm trying to do is break down some of these silos because it has created silos in the organization. So trying to create a sense of community. So setting up a guild. So I've had to kind of like start that, bring people together, share best practice, start developing a data strategy for the entire organization, and help open their eyes to better ways of using data. So very much at the moment, it's very sort of MI, Excel based. There's pockets of, some ML going on. But there are far better ways of using data. So it's about educating both people who are working with data, but also the wider organization that there's more value that we can create because it is an amazing organization. The scale is quite huge. We make twice as many deliveries in the UK as Deliveroo or Just Eat. We have our challenges. I can see some people kind of shaking their head, and it's true. We do have challenges. I'm not going to admit that, but that's why I'm joining the organization, which is to help make it better.
Rob?
So, organizations are full of insanity, and if you spend long enough time in any organization, you accept the insanity as normal, and you become blind to it. And the 45-step process that requires 12 approvals that anyone else could just make a change in any other normal company, you just say that's just the way it is. It's easy to come in as an outsider and say, look, I've got an answer to this insanity. And as a leader, it's even easier because you actually have the power and authority to do so a lot of times. What you lack is the context on how you ended up in that. So I'm going to answer your question, I promise. I'll get there. But I think one of the biggest sins a new leader can do when they enter an organization is start immediately trying to say, I have answers to all this. I have this plan, I have this, I have this. The first thing you have to do is understand exactly what are the frustrations, and those will be different from those problems or those insanities, but what's actually annoying people, and try to start solving those to show you can make positive impact on their experience. I mean, simplistically, the first thing I did is I sat down, when I joined my new company about 2 months ago, is I sat down with my engineers, I looked at all their calendars, I looked at all the shit that was going on with Jira, and I just asked them, what's making you annoyed? What do you hate? And I literally remember one of my first interviews with one of my engineers. He's like, I've just given up. I've been here a year and a half. I just accept it is the way it is. And I was like, okay, well, that's horrible. Let's fix that. And I literally went through and I rebuilt their time management. I rebuilt Jira. I asked them to tell me how they wanted to do it. And I refactored a ton of stuff. And after 2 weeks, I said, look, we're going to do it this way. And you're going to tell me if this is good. And when they said, yeah, we're really happy, and actually the guy came back a month later, he's like, okay, actually I believe now we can do things better and the company can change and I'm a bit happier than I was before. I'm like, okay, that's success. So in terms of start, stop, continue, I don't know if there's one answer that would make sense for anyone coming into a new organization, but I can say the right behavior is understand what your team needs, create wins for them to build trust, to then start thinking about the bigger, longer term directions that you want to take with the group. So I think that's really, really important. And in a fast-moving organization, that might happen in a couple of weeks. Miro is a very fast-moving organization. In bigger companies, you're looking at months to quarters, I know, but you have to match to that timeline appropriately.
I can't stress that enough. If you are a manager in this room, there is a great deal of experience and knowledge in your individual contributors. Leverage that. Let's take a question from the audience.
Thank you. I might give you two, and we're quietly running out of time. Just slip that in there. But how do you pitch the concept of a data team to a board of Luddites? Not my choice of word.
Luddites. It means, well, okay, I've done this before. You come in and you say, you know how you have a bunch of data scientists, so you have $1 million to spend, $2 million to spend, and it's went nowhere? Well, you did this wrong. You did this top-down thing. Your bird said, we're going to be data-driven now, and rah, rah, rah. Well, you didn't have the right people. You didn't have the right plan. And so we have to do this a different way. We need data teams. What about for you?
I think you're right. Like, you started with surfacing the pain points and getting people become aware of those pain points, and then how they arrived at those. I mean, in case of data mesh, I mean, the reason it has become viral so quickly, it was because it surfaced the pain point. So I suppose you can take the same strategy. And any consultants in the room? No consultants? There's a couple of consultants? Yeah. So
They just don't know how to admit
influential,
it.
they don't. You're always selling, no matter you're a consultant or not. There's a fantastic HBR article by Lady Duarte. She does presentations, persuasive presentations and persuasive conversations. So this is just one other example of persuasive conversation. And what you do is you basically show where they are and where they could be, and show the gap, and then show, incrementally the steps together, and contrast where we are, it's a painful place, things are not working, it's great place, and then repeat that a few times and iterate over the steps. That's just a general answer, I guess, to any sort of persuasive situation.
There was one question that got a lot of votes. It's actually the top scoring question, so I'm going to ask it to all of you, which is around the Great Resignation and keeping your team inspired, engaged, and fulfilled. And Harvinder, Rob, I think that relates to you also coming into a new team as well. So any thoughts? Extra points if you answer it in 2 minutes.
Not me then. And so I think it is a challenge, right? So we all know it's a very hot jobs market out there. There's a war for talent. I think a lot of it starts with giving people meaningful work and a meaningful mission, and showing them that there are development opportunities, that there are ways for them to learn, and making sure that what they produce has a positive outcome, right? So we all want to go into work. We want that effort to result in something, right? So making sure that you're focusing on outcomes has to be the front and center of everything that you do.
Yeah, I think just speaking maybe to the data engineering or the data world, what I learned was that it's an under-rewarded job and it's hard work. Data teams often get stuck between the data producers, teams that are generating data, and they're actually close to the source, or teams that are using that data in some meaningful business context. And data team are sandwiched in between, and they're not being satisfied by the intrinsic human motivations, which is mastery, autonomy, and purpose. There's no autonomy because they've got dependencies. There's no purpose in terms of getting that immediate feedback of what value, what impact do I have on the business. I mean, all of our software engineering practices has evolved over the last 2 decades around fast feedback, continuous delivery. It's about get your code to production, see the impact of it, see the delight of the end user, and get that feedback. And that's just fundamentally absent from data work because we're sandwiched in between. We're not seeing the final impact. So getting people closer to peer-to-peer collaborations, having what they're producing turned into a product that delights some other human being directly, and getting that feedback, that's just fundamental to how we have a sense of satisfaction.
I have a thought there. Be a leader who cares. Do you remember what it was like being an individual contributor? Do you remember what drove you nuts every single day? Ask the people what drives them nuts every single day, and you will stem that bleeding. The Great Resignation isn't coming from people who are independently wealthy. I think it's coming from people who are fed up with coming into a job that they hate every day. Ask them what makes them hate that, and fix it.
Right. Oh. Okay. 4 questions, 1 a minute. I might cut you off if you don't go within the minute. I think the next one's Rob's.
Rob,
Yeah.
we've talked about diversity on our episode, and that was super important. One of the things I'm actually excited about looking at this conference is the diversity. I am so excited about the diversity I saw here. Why is the diversity so important to you?
Okay, so quick show of hands around the room. Who has been part of a team or a group where you kind of felt like an outsider because you came from a different place, different background, different age, different ethnicity or lifestyle choice or orientation? Okay, so those of you with your hands up, me too, by the way, surprisingly as a white guy from the US, you speak less, you're more hesitant, you feel less respected sometimes, you find it harder to voice your opinion, you find it harder for people to understand what you have to say. For those of you who didn't put your hand up, you're very privileged and you have this obligation or opportunity to make the others feel much more part of it. Building a diverse team creates an incredible opportunity. You can read statistics on that, but what I think is more important is it creates an opportunity to create a common dialogue in the group, a common way of communication that drops the groupthink that comes from the same nationality or whatever else. And it creates a space where you get more great ideas and you make people feel more welcome, and you create actually a stronger team because you're seeing them as individuals. It's not group A, which is 70% and a bunch of other people. It's we're all part of this one common team who have built an appreciation of each other based on the individual experiences and attributes that we bring to the conversation. The best teams I've worked with have been insanely diverse in terms of where people came from, who they were, how they looked, and it's been the most amazing experiences I've had as a professional as well.
Care to add anything on no? No?
I think
Okay.
that was an amazing answer.
Yeah.
That was a very good
Plus
answer.
100.
So yes, I'm super excited to what I saw here at the conference. That could be replicated in other conferences. So we're running out of time, so I have one final question for you. What do you want to be remembered for? Harvinder?
Hopefully, sharing my work on data ops, I've helped people. So that was really my ambition for writing the book, was I saw lots of frustrations, not just me personally, but chatting to my peers. And hopefully if I've helped people kind of acquire new knowledge that's helped them on a day-to-day basis, helped them make some positive impacts and driven some positive outcomes from data, I'd be very happy with that.
Rob?
Helping people grow into their passions as data professionals, as whatever they want to be, coaching and giving them opportunities and letting them achieve whatever life path they're going to take. That's every person I've managed. My measure of success is when I hear from them 2 years, 3 years later, and they say, I'm on my next career step and I want to talk with you about it and I want to understand how I can be successful here.
Zhamak?
Planting a seed of change. I think, with data mesh as an example, it was really a question. It was a curious question, why we do things the way we do. It was a seed I planted with you and everybody else, with individuals, I guess, turned that into a tree, and together we build a forest. So planting the seed.
So for me personally, it was me trying to be the change that I wanted. So when I was sitting out in your audience shoes, and I was thinking, man, I really wish somebody would tell me how I could get up here. And nobody was there. Nobody could tell me how to be up here giving a conference talk. And nobody told me how to do a podcast. Or nobody told me how to start a company. and I started a company. I did a lot of this stuff, but I didn't have somebody there helping me, and I didn't have somebody there to tell me about this. So this is what I want to be known for. I want to be out there known as the person who helped other people start their business, start their company, and really encourage them to do that. Because technical entrepreneurship, you see a lot of startups there. These were started by business people. These weren't started by tech people. And I really want to see that change. I want to see tech people really getting those massive exits too. I really want to see change within the industry. I really want to see this. And this is part of why I've tried to communicate this, I've tried to share as openly and honestly as possible. With that, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to those watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff.